This week, the Inspector General issued a report on the FBI's investigation of Trump campaign associates. The results were a mixed bag, but it generally found there was some more incompetence than malfeasance. Still, some believe that the FBI's behavior was dubious at best. In an in-depth piece over at The Intercept, friend of the show Glenn Greenwald said, quote, "No matter how dangerous you believe the Trump presidency is, this is a grave threat to the pillars of democracy, a free press, an informed citizenry, and a rule of law."
Joining us via Skype with his take on the revelations in the IG report is Rolling Stone reporter and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, Matt Taibbi. He also has some great perspective on the Washington Post reporting, investigating how the American public has been lied to by administration after administration on the war in Afghanistan. Always great to have you, Matt.
How you doing, Crystal, Sagar?
Hey,
Very good. So you've also been writing about the IG report, so let's start there. What were some of the most troubling findings in your view?
Well, so a lot of this was known before, but I think what Inspector General Horowitz detailed that was the most troubling was the degree to which the FBI not only knew that some of the information that it had that was using in a FISA application for former Trump aide Carter Page was unreliable, but they actually affirmatively changed some things and added details to the background of Christopher Steele in particular to make him look like a more credible source. So they were affirmatively doctoring the application, which was something worse than what we understood previously. But the big takeaway was that it was a very big blow to the Steele dossier. It describes in great detail how the FBI must have known pretty early in the game that was an unreliable document and used it anyway.
Yeah, and Matt, I mean, I think as much of an FBI story, this is also a media story. I mean, so much of the media ran with this. They consistently said over and over again, there's no way the FBI could pursue a FISA based on this dossier. And even if they did, the dossier itself is true. None of that turned out to be the case. Maybe you can talk a little bit about from that perspective.
Right. So I think the scandalous thing from the point of view of the media is that there were several enormous sort of bombshell stories that were based on this Steele material. The first big one came in the first week of January 2017 when 4 intelligence chiefs presented Trump with the Steele dossier, ostensibly to protect him from blackmail and to make him aware that there was this material out there. That news of that meeting was immediately leaked to the press, which then, of course, reported that there was material that suggesting that the Russians had attempted to blackmail the president. Now, the problem was nobody had verified that material. And even though news agencies had the Steele report, they had been sitting on it until that moment. But when we heard about that meeting, suddenly everybody felt they had permission to write about all this, and they never bothered to verify the material. The second big one was that there was a FISA warrant on Carter Page, and this was reported that it meant that a court had found probable cause to believe that he was an agent of a foreign power. But as we now know, the court had been misled, and there was no evidence that he was an agent of a foreign power. And so basically in all these cases, the press was taking the word of unnamed, anonymous law enforcement sources and, who were taking them for a ride, and they don't seem to be very upset about it.
Yeah. That's the question I had is, has there been any reckoning? Has anyone acknowledged, we trusted these people and they obviously were spinning us and here's what the reality was? Has there been any of that soul searching from any corner?
No, because the stories weren't technically incorrect from a journalistic standpoint, right? So if you can say technically it's true that there was a FISA warrant that had been issued, which did technically mean that a court had found there was probable cause that Carter Page was an agent of a foreign power. However, the underlying story was completely wrong. And so you would only be upset about that if you had ethics, right? I mean, if you were worried about, getting stuff wrong, which is, something normally you would in this business. But I think in this highly politicized atmosphere, people are, saying as long as we did the minimal requirements, we're okay. But, clearly these stories were factually extremely problematic and nobody's upset about it.
Right. And Matt, I mean, the worst offenders are still all on cable television now talking about Ukraine. right? I mean, the absolute worst offenders of all of this, the CIA spokespeople, many of these former national security officials, some of whom I bet you leaked that initial meeting, are now literally on the payroll for these news organizations, acting as analysts in the ongoing Ukraine matter. I mean, so much of their credibility to the American public is just completely sunk after this, don't you think?
I mean, I think that's a major news story that gets so comparatively little attention. It's basically like an invasion of the news networks that market themselves, especially to quote unquote liberal audiences. There's probably a dozen former intelligence officials who are now on the air as paid contributors on CNN, MSNBC, and who are writing as editorialists in the big newspapers as well. And the conflict that I see especially is what happens, for instance, when the Durham report comes out, which is about directly a lot of these people. So they're going to be commenting on a news story in which they have involvement. They've already done that. And people don't see the problem here. I mean, there's a huge issue with these people slanting the news in the direction of the national security establishment. And nobody seems to have an issue with it. I think it's a tremendous problem.
Well, Jim Comey says the FBI is owed an apology, so that's good enough for me.
Horowitz disagreed with that.
Thank you so much, Matt. Always great to have you.
Yeah. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.